Welcome to the Unit Economics Podcast. I'm Josh Dubinsky. On today's episode, I sit down with Tomo Delaney, founder of Noshi for Kids. After 25 years working in fashion, Tomo started Noshi in 2015 with food paint, a line of fruit and vegetable purees that kids could use to decorate their food. Over the years, food paint made its way into Walmart and eventually into Shark Tank, where Tomo struck a deal with Mark Cuban. But now, more than a decade later, Tomo's preparing to launch a new version of food paint, this time made with naturally colored frosting. In this conversation, we talk about what Tomo learned from building the original product, the challenges he encountered along the way, and what ultimately led him to rethink food paint. We also get into manufacturing, pricing, margins, and how Tomo is approaching the business differently this time around. I learned a lot during my conversation with Tomo, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Tomo, thank you so much for taking the time to do this today. If you wouldn't mind just starting with a brief background on yourself, that would be great.
Goodness, I mean, that's a 3-day story, but I'll try and keep it condensed as much as possible. I worked in the fashion industry for 25 years. It was all I'd ever wanted to do from a very young age. And so I just got into the industry and got myself to the top of it very quickly. And it was fabulous fun, very exciting, very glamorous. And then I grew out of it. I think it's probably one of the best industries to work in if you're 18 to 30, but it's a young person's industry and we were having kids. And I was looking for a way to not escape it because, again, I've got nothing bad to say about it, but I was just looking for a way to move sideways, I suppose. And my wife was making good money, so we decided that I would become the stay-at-home parent for a bit. So I did that, and it was blissfully enjoyable, and my kids were perfect in every single respect, except for the fact that they weren't hugely interested in meal times. They weren't picky eaters. They would eat broccoli if I got them up to the table and eating, but they just weren't inspired by food. And so I Googled picky eating, and the solution, the cure for picky eating is staring you right in the face. If you Google it, it's not hard to find. And the answer is to step back and leave your children alone and leave them, in peace to handle it themselves. And so I then thought, well, in that case, given this is such an obvious solution, there must be numerous products out there already that were designed for you to be used by children at the table, food products. And I discovered very quickly that there were zero. And in fact, now, 11 years later, there still are zero, apart from you could suggest a Go-Gut tube is a product that children are allowed to use themselves. But it blows my mind that this hasn't been addressed more thoroughly.
So once you discovered that this gap existed and it was as large as it was, or is as large as it is, I should say, what did you, I guess, initially think you were going to start to develop?
Nothing. I took on board this information. I was like, oh, that's interesting. But my wife was nagging me to think about a career, and I didn't want to go back into fashion. So I was feeling some pressure from there. And my new specialist subject was children's food. And so I was discussing this with a family friend one day and thinking maybe if I had to choose a new career today, right now, it would probably be something to do with kids' food. And, maybe a cure for picky eating, and maybe a product that's designed for children to use that, if they're over there playing on their iPad and watching cartoons and drawing with crayons, something that inspires them to come over here and get up to the table, something as interesting and stimulating as the stuff they're doing over there. And this friend of mine laughed and said, what about edible paint? And I laughed. And then I said, what do you mean? Suddenly realizing that she was serious. And she said, well, you want them to put down those crayons and come over here. What about, and I was like, what is edible paint? And she said, well, presumably it's something healthy, at which point it's fruit and vegetable puree, right? In different colors, and I was like, oh my God, that's a really, really good idea. And I left her apartment, having already in the space of 10 minutes, we sat there and jokingly came up with the flavors and the colors. Red strawberry, orange is carrot, yellow is mango, green is pea, blue is blueberry. And I left her apartment inspired, and I came home, and our youngest kid, Davey, had just started preschool. So I had some free time every day, and I just sat down and got to work. And the hilarious thing is, as I'm sure you know, the food industry is like a closed book. It's not even a matter of trying to get your foot in the door. You can't find the door to get your foot in. It's completely shut out. So it took me literally months to find anything and anyone that would be helpful in getting this project off the ground. I mean, I was sitting at home full of, inspired beyond belief. And I was like, oh my God, it can be this, and it's going to be this, and I was raring to go. And it took me months, but and again, probably as a result of my complete naivety and lack of experience in the industry, I just didn't really understand what I was, the scale of this project I was undertaking. And that's why I just kept going, because I was inspired enough by the idea that I thought it was worth doing.
Yeah, that's a theme that I hear over and over again. Were you starting to formulate in the kitchen at home?
I was pureeing strawberries and carrots and peas and mangoes and blueberries, and they looked amazing. And of course, again, lack of experience. If you want to make fruit and vegetables shelf stable, you have to pasteurize them. And as soon as you pasteurize red products especially, they turn brown. So I didn't know that. But again, at the time, I was my target audience. I was a millennial mom. I was a stay-at-home parent, and I was creating this product as something I would want to buy myself for my kids, because I wanted to, instill creativity in them. And so I just kept on plodding forwards. And finally, 18 months or so after, actually, I mean, this is a very long and meandering tale. So the idea, I started work in March 2015. Put a Kickstarter online in April 2015. Shark Tank found it after a week and came to us and said, oh my God, this is amazing. We want to put you on the show. Couldn't put us on the show because we literally didn't have a product. We had no packaging. We didn't have a name. We didn't have final formulations. We had nothing. But I had all these email addresses in my back pocket. Then, started methodically working my way forward, found a formulator. He spent a year formulating it to the point where we were happy with what he'd come up with. That was then put in front of a friend of my wife's from college who worked with supermarket chains in mergers and acquisitions. And he spent a lot of time, he had relationships with all the supermarket chains. And he put my product in front of a lovely guy called Larry Hansen, who was the head of sales at Albertsons. And he was intrigued enough to stop and think about what it could become and decided to help. And the long story short, about 9 months later, about 6 months later, in the summer of 2017, we launched into about 170 Albertsons and Safeway stores. And then a month after that, we launched into all 165 Jewel Osco stores. So within 6 weeks of launch, we were in nearly 400 stores. I had no experience. I had no idea that we needed a marketing budget. I didn't realize how expensive distribution was, but people had taken a chance, and that's become a common theme. So for 18 months after that, the product sold-ish. Some stores kept it, some dropped it. I had thought that in creating a unique product, I was a genius. I'm like, oh my God, this is it. Somebody's going to cut us a check for $500 million and we can retire and buy an island in the Bahamas. But of course, that's not how this industry works. Inventing a unique product is a disaster because people have their shopping habits, often inherited from their own parents. Buying something new, people don't have time to stop and think about what is food paint? Is it paint? Is it food? There was a disconnect. Children loved it. Children absolutely loved it because it was just doing what I discovered on day one when I Googled picky eating. It was like, you're letting me do this myself? Really? I'm not going to spray it up the walls or across my sibling's face. I'm going to do what you told me to do with this because this is amazing. I can't believe nobody's ever trusted me to do anything at the table. And here I am, a 5-year-old kid, and I've got a tube of paint and I can paint it on my pancakes and then I can eat it. This is incredible. So we had the kids, and that's what has always kept me moving forward and kept me thoroughly convinced that this has to be a good thing and that at some point it's going to explode. But the parents, of course, you've got a few problems. You've got a product called food paint. So once you've got them to understand that it's food, they want the product or expect the product coming out of the tube to look like paint. And organic fruit puree, as was the product at the time, doesn't look like paint. I mean, the yellow mango was pretty, but the blueberry was, blueberries are effectively black once you pureed them. And the strawberry was uninspiring. It was borderline brown. So parents were always underwhelmed by it. But I kept keeping on, and I made the commitment to spend money to go to Expo West in spring of 2019. And on the last day of Expo West, a very, very young guy came out of the crowd and worked for Walmart. And 6 months later, we launched into Walmart with me having made no effort at all to get into Walmart. It all happened completely organically, excuse the pun. And suddenly we're in Walmart. And that was amazing. And my relationship with Walmart lasted 5 years and was extremely harmonious. I loved working with them. I think they get a bad reputation, but from the perspective of a supplier selling through Walmart, it's an amazing partner to have. I mean, because there is no distribution, unlike the other big grocery chains who rely on KeHE and UNFI to cover the distribution. Walmart doesn't do that, and so it suddenly becomes very, very affordable, which is amazing for a young brand. That takes us up to about the end of 2019.
For listeners who are not aware, Tomo made an appearance on Shark Tank, and I'd like to anchor this part of the conversation around that experience. So you mentioned earlier that they had reached out to you. I presume that you reached back out to them maybe somewhere along the way. Is that true? Is that what happened?
So we're in Walmart, fall of 2019, we launched into Walmart. And of course, early 2020, COVID happens. And my wife suddenly got very sick with COVID and it turned into long COVID and she lost her job. And she had been the one who was, supporting us basically while I was building this brand. So that was utterly terrifying. And suddenly I'm having to look after her, look after our 2 children who are home from school and try and keep my business afloat. And constantly be thinking, well, what if she never works again? We're in serious trouble here. Fast forward 2 years to the spring of 2022, and she still hadn't got any better. And I'm sitting at home, utterly desperate, and thinking, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I'm so scared. And this is the worst experience of my life. Oh, I've got all those email addresses from Shark Tank. I'm so desperate at this point. I'm prepared to try anything. They're not going to see them. But I knew that it was the right time of year for their casting, which was to say late March, early April. So I dug these email addresses out from my God knows where, from the depths of my address book. And I just sent them all. I had 5 email addresses and I sent each of them a separate email saying the same thing, which is, hi, we spoke back then. It was too early. We didn't have a product. We didn't have stockists, but now we do have a product and we're sold in 500 Walmart stores. And of course, the cynic in me felt obliged to let them know about the human interest element to the story, which is my wife's sick. I'm trying to support my kids. I'm trying to And I pressed send and I did not expect anything to happen at all. But of course, I think 13 minutes later, one of them replied. And I was on the phone to them 24 hours later. And every single call I had with them, I got flicked up the ladder very, very quickly. So from the intern to casting to production to, and it went like this very quickly. And I think I was confirmed a spot on the show about 3 weeks after I'd sent that email. It all happened very, very quickly. And then I was assigned 2 lovely producers, Maggie and Kelly, and they are, as an entity, Shark Tank is extremely well run. They are amazing at what they do. And so I flew to LA and taped my episode on September 11th, 2022. Got a deal from Mark Cuban, which closed and funded at the end of 2022. He renegotiated the deal, but that was great because all I wanted was to have Mark Cuban on my cap table. The amount of money coming in was it was secondary. My priority was to get Mark onto the cap table.
Oh, man, there's so many questions I could ask here. So you are not the first guest I've had on the show that's been on Shark Tank, but you are the first guest that I've known was on Shark Tank. I had Lauren Menard of Gob on the show, and she had been on Shark Tank, but it was under wraps because the episode hadn't aired yet, so I was unable to ask her any questions about this. So I've seen your Shark Tank pitch, and for listeners who might not have seen it, can you just describe what the experience was like in the tank?
Yeah, I can. Suddenly, you're standing in the middle of the stage and the 5 sharks are sitting in front of you in a semicircle. And then behind them is darkness. And you know that there's another 150 people standing in the shadows behind them. And the stage manager is standing next to you and he's counting down. And you're sitting there thinking, I cannot, excuse my language, but I cannot fuck this up. My literal existence depends on this being successful. My wife's in bed, has been in bed for 3 years. She's probably never going to work again. My kids are sitting at home with babysitters because my wife's moved back to England to stay with her parents while I try and get this together. I can't fail. I've just got to do this. Again, you are rehearsed so brilliantly by Shark Tank in the months running up to your appearance that you will not mess up your pitch. They drill you over and over again. You cannot, by the time you walk onto that stage, you know that you're not going to mess up the pitch. The numbers are important. And so I was worried that I might not remember the right numbers. And there were questions I was worried about having to answer that didn't get asked. So maybe I had a guardian angel looking over my shoulder that day, but I did it. But of course, 4 of them dropped out very quickly.
And what was their pushback or reasoning for saying no?
Barbara said she thought it was a novelty product, and didn't have enough mass market appeal, which is fine. Laurie, I knew, having spoken to QVC brokers in the years before my appearance, that kids' products don't sell on QVC. So I wasn't expecting much to come from that. She made up some excuse about the packaging design, which even at the time I remember thinking that's a bit of a weird thing to say. It would have been easier for her to say, I'm really sorry, but kids' products don't sell on QVC. Damon, who's the one shark I was in front of that day who has kids who are, my target audience, he said, let me get this straight. You want me to ask my children to play with their food? And I said, yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I want. And he went, no. He said, no, that doesn't happen in our house. And I was like, okay. Kevin, I can't remember what happened with Kevin. Walking onto the stage, I had assumed he would probably be my likeliest bet. I never watched Shark Tank ever. I've never watched it. I can't watch it. I feel too stressed on behalf of the entrepreneurs. So I just can't watch it. It's way too stressful. So I had not watched it at all until the week before I flew to LA, when I forced myself to sit down and watch 2 episodes just so I could get a handle on the running, on the structure of the show and how a pitch runs. On those 2 episodes that I watched, Mark didn't say a single word. And so he was this entity over here that didn't exist in my world. He hadn't registered. I knew that he owned a basketball team and I knew he was wealthy, but I didn't really know much more about him beyond that. And suddenly I'm faced with this situation where these guys here, all 4 of them in a row, have said no. And I just turned to like, Mark, can I interest you? And the rest. He did it. And for that, I will be eternally grateful. He's a lovely, lovely man, and he's an amazing business partner to have. And his people in his office are all also amazing, lovely people. And you sort of expect that to be the case. You can just from listening to him, you get the impression he's a decent person and he's going to have good people working for him. But my experience with everybody in his office from day one, basically the day after we verbally agreed the terms of the deal, he put me in touch with his office and we all started working together and they've been great. So the deal closed early in 2023. My wife flew home and was just determined to get better. And so she found a way of recovering from long COVID, and it's a lot to do with neural retraining. Your brain has been tricked. The theory is that your brain's tricked your body into thinking you're unwell and you need to retrain your brain. But she did it and she got better and it was amazing. And she's now back to full health and working. But what happened? Mark's money arrived. I'd moved to a new, supposedly better run co-packer because I didn't want him to give me all this money and then us not be able to seal the deal. I wanted to make sure we were working with a co-packer who could make my product and make it in volume and grow the company. They told me the day after, because I owned all of my own machinery. So I moved all my own machinery 500 miles up to them. The day after I dropped it off, they turned around and told me they didn't have an engineer on staff. And I was like, what? How can you run a manufacturing facility without anybody on staff to maintain the machinery? And they said, it's fine. And I said, no, it's not fine. It's not. But I've just moved all of this. I burnt bridges with my last guys. This is a real problem. And so I made plans to effectively live up there. I'm not going to even give them the pleasure of saying where they were. Made the decision to be up there for a month and probably run the line myself because I knew how to run the line. And then the week before I was due to go up there, because we'd scheduled this month of full production, Walmart had given us an additional 1,500 stores based on the fact that we'd told them I was going to be on Shark Tank. So we had 2,200 Walmart stores to fill. And I wanted to get a production run done for Amazon so that we could sell single units on Amazon, which is where most of Shark Tank revenue is generated over the weekend that your episode airs. You know, people just want to try it by buying a single unit on Amazon. My wife got sick again. She was rushed into hospital completely by coincidence with endocarditis and had open heart surgery, and had a stroke, had open heart surgery, came through it. It went as well as it could be expected to, but she was in hospital. And meanwhile, our 2 children are at home, and there's no way I can move up to the factory for a month and oversee any production. So long story short, production imploded quite spectacularly. And by the end of that month, we'd lost half of those Walmart stores before they'd even been stocked. Most of Mark's money had been spent on repairs. It was awful. And my wife was in hospital as well, and I'm worrying whether she's going to get better. Anyway, when the dust settled, I didn't really have a company. But around that time, somebody in Mark's office said, I want you to talk to this guy. I think he's really clever and I think he might be helpful. And so she and I spoke to him, and he said, very diplomatically, he said, I think you should reinvent this product as frosting. And I said, I couldn't possibly do that. This is an organic brand. Frosting is just crap in a tub or crap in a tube. And he said, yeah, but he said, buttercream frosting was invented in 1915 and nobody has done anything to bring frosting up to date since then. He said, it's a wide open space. He said, you could make a big splash. And I said, thank you very much, but I really can't contemplate that. But I always knew from the minute that we got to the point where we had a final formulation at the end of 2017, at the end of 2016, that we knew was the best version of this product we were ever going to be able to make. And so we moved forward and went into production. I knew even then that it was slightly underwhelming, especially from the perspective of a parent, and that it wasn't really good enough. And my hope and expectation had been, look, I've invented a unique product. A unique product is a bad idea, but this is a really cool unique product. And I know that children love it. So surely there's going to have to be one smart person out there who's smart enough to see that this has huge potential and gives me a load of cash to either help me or to do it themselves. I just need one break. So suddenly I get into Walmart. That's a huge break. Nothing really happens. I get onto Shark Tank. That's a huge break. Mark gives me a deal. That's a huge break. And I'm like, I'm sitting here today and I will say until the cows come home, I am so proud of Food Paint. I think it is a genuinely brilliant idea. And I fully expect it to make everybody concerned a lot of money. But at the time, I knew it wasn't right. And of course, the problem with it was that if you buy a product called Food Paint, you expect the product coming out of the tube to look like paint. And it didn't. And I knew that that was a big problem. So this guy saying frosting, I went away and I was like, that's sort of what it's got to be. That is what it has to be. And I bought different colored frosting in tubes and it looked amazing, but it tasted so bad. Tasted really, really bad. I'm like, these colors are radioactive and it tastes almost literally like shit. What a weird product. And maybe there is something here. My episode re-airs about every 6 months, and every time it does, I get emails from parents saying, sometimes saying this is an amazing product. And one of them was from at the beginning of last year, 2025. I got an email from a really lovely woman called Stacey who lives here in New York. So we had coffee. And I said, that product doesn't really exist, but I'm thinking about doing frosting. And she said, you've got to do frosting. And so I was like, okay. She said, I'm going to be your moral support here. I'm going to bug you until you launch Food Paint frosting, because she said that's what it needs to be. I left that coffee shop. Literally, it was snowing outside in the West Village, and I walked out of Miranda's where I'd met her, and I immediately called Fred, my food scientist, and I said, could you make frosting healthier? Fully expecting him to say, absolutely not, it's disgusting. And he said, absolutely, yes. And I said, oh, really? What would you do? And he said, natural colors, natural flavors. We can put vitamins in it. We can put nutrients in it. And I was like, oh my God, really? Well, in that case, let's have a think about this properly. Unbeknownst to me, he was so inspired that he went off and started making it. in his lab. And that was 18 months ago. And we are just about to launch. We're in production next month. No, we're in production this month, actually, at the end of this month. And it should be available to buy and be shipped to customers by the end of next month at the latest.
It is an incredible story. And I have so many questions. How are you thinking about running the business differently as a result of such a dramatic shift in the product that you're selling?
Well, there's a depressing answer to that, which is when I created this product in 2015, and for a good few years after that, there was a real drive behind launching organic brands and making children's food healthier. And this is a seismic shift in the way food products are thought of, and of course, more recently, that's really been sidelined, and that's a real shame. But I'm a businessman. I want my children to eat as healthily as possible. If Fred had said to me that day, I cannot make frosting healthier, I wouldn't have moved forward with this project at all. In as much as I can, I want to make a product as healthy as possible. There are two business models in the world of frosting. There is organic frosting, which is made with coconut sugar and coconut flour, and the COGS of that product is here. I'm not going after that. That's not what I'm making. I'm going after Betty Crocker, Duncan Hines, Wilton, Pillsbury. I'm going after a Walmart shopper, not a Whole Foods shopper. In the wonderful world of frosting, natural colors cost 10 times more than artificial colors. So for brands like Betty Crocker and Duncan Hines and Wilton, they've sort of painted themselves into a corner because they've completely monopolized the market and have completely controlled it for decades. And I'm sure their margin is insanely high because the ingredients they've been using are cheap as chips, and they sell a pound of frosting for $4, right? So they can't really move into naturally colored frosting because if they did, the COGS on the naturally colored version is going to be significantly higher and their margin is going to be significantly lower if they try and sell it for the same price. So they can either drop the price of their current products, which they're not going to be able to do, or they're going to have to sell naturally colored frosting for like $12 a tub, which they also can't do. Whereas I can sell naturally colored frosting for almost exactly the same price they sell artificially colored frosting, just because I'm not beholden to shareholders or my existing product SRP. So I'm in rather a unique situation because the only way those guys can get into naturally colored is via acquisition. And I'm certainly not looking to sell Noshi anytime soon. But if I'm the only potential target, that's going to be an interesting position to be in, I think. But again, there are days when I get out of bed and I'm like, I would sell this company for $25 and a can of Coke at this point. Or other days when things go right and I'm like, I am in this for the long haul. I'm like, it is so inspiring to me. And I just, when something goes right, it feels like winning the lottery because it's such a hard industry to not only grow in, but also survive in. Just being able to, having survived for this long is an achievement in and of itself. So when you actually get a win, it's the best feeling in the world. And I know that when this product launches in 6 weeks' time, it is so eye-catching. And I didn't design it to go viral on TikTok, but I'm pretty sure it will go viral on TikTok because the product itself is brightly colored. The colors themselves are amazing, even though they're natural. They don't look natural. They look completely artificial because they're so bright. The branding is kid-friendly. I mean, everything about it just screams virality. And I'm really excited by that. It's a very different world. I've had some really interesting conversations around TikTok over the last few months. Speaking to brand owners who who do $100,000 a month in revenue, and stumbled upon their business model by accident. And they now have a commercial kitchen in their backyard and they've got 8 full-time staff working out there. Or a TikTok agency guy who contacted me out of the blue, and the first thing he said was, "You've got to double your retail price." He's like, "People will buy this for $20. You're trying to sell it for $9.99 is insane." He said so. So that was great advice. And then at the end of the conversation, when I said to him, "Oh my God, this has been so good. When you're in New York next, let me buy you a beer." And he said, you can't. I'm too young. I'm only 19 years old. And I was like, "Well, of course you are. You're a TikTok expert."
It's so interesting to me. Throughout the conversation, there have been a couple of different points he made around, I knew this was a problem, right? I knew that the color not being inspiring or the ultimate version of this product not being that inspiring was an issue. Or earlier in the conversation, alluding to shelf placement. Where could food paint sit on shelf in a store, and confusion around the term, the name food paint, right? All these little things. And so I'm wondering, thinking back on this entire experience, I guess, are there any moments where you look back and you say, oh, maybe that was the signal that should have told me I should have pivoted?
No,
None.
absolutely not. I think everything has happened at the right speed. It's been frustratingly slow for the vast majority of it, but it's all happened at the right speed for the right reason. I've learned stuff when I've needed to learn it. This couldn't have happened any other way. I mean, even down to the point where I'm getting off that call with the guy who suggested frosting, and I'm still thinking, I can't do that. That's not healthy enough. That's just not good. The way I approach this, as in any entrepreneurial journey, you go through stages of absolute terror. Why have I done this? What on earth am I doing? This has to succeed. It's too big to fail. Sleepless nights. That all passed years ago. But it's all been a process, and it's all happened at exactly the right pace, and things have been put in front of me at the right time. I do think that all of that is because the strength of the idea itself is such that if I had decided to launch a range of cookies, I would have probably failed within 6 months. But because this is what it is, and its uniqueness has kept me interested in it, I suppose.
How are you thinking about distribution? Are you solely D2C to start? Are you going into retail?
DTC only, based on the advice of one of my advisors, who is the managing director of a very, very well-known consumer brand. And he has built their Amazon business in the US only to $60 million per year, just on Amazon, just in the USA every year. And so he's the one who's been saying to me, it looks amazing. It is amazing. It will go viral on TikTok. We don't need the headaches around distribution and physical retail and slotting fees. And I've made peace with that. But then, of course, about a month ago, I suddenly realized that it's baking line review time at Walmart. And because of what I'd said previously about Walmart, about them being such a joy to work with and it being such a clean process, it would be silly of me not to present it to them. So I've made contact with the baking buyer at Walmart, and I'm hoping to be able to present it to her next month. But really, beyond that, I think this product is so strong that I think, of course, this might all not happen, but my thinking is that it will get some kind of traction on TikTok, and as more and more people discover it, they will sing its praises from the rooftops. I'm going to let retailers come to us, which sounds very big-headed of me, but it's not really. It's much more to do with the fact that it's just not tenable for me to launch into retail at the moment. Expense-wise, I think it's a much easier launch plan to just stick to DTC.
That makes complete sense. What have you learned about the TikTok shop since pivoting to frosting?
It took me 6 months to get approved on TikTok shop, but I did, and we now have a TikTok shop, which I've built it out. This product is there. All I need to do is flick the switch and turn it on. And again, based on that conversation I had with that very young TikTok agent, we know that TikTok is amazing for eyeballs. I don't think we're going to start doing $100,000 a month in revenue on TikTok shop on day one, but it will spread fast on TikTok. And, between TikTok and Amazon and our website, I'm pretty confident that we're going to do at least $1 million in revenue in the first 12 months.
How much stronger are the margins for the frosting versus food paint? And how much of that is a result of increasing the price point to $19.99 versus just the ingredients being significantly cheaper?
Our margin for food paint version 1, the organic puree at Walmart, was 26%. And it was Mark Cuban that said, you've got to say goodbye to those guys. And it might be a lovely, happy, friendly relationship, he said, but that's not tenable. And he was right. The margin on this product on TikTok and on our website is 70%. Obviously on it's the same on Amazon, except that you have to accept that 50% of your sell price on Amazon disappears the day that somebody buys some. But again, it's a healthy enough margin that it's a really good margin. Ultimately, I mean, the full COGS for 4 tubes is, I think, $520.
Yeah, it just strikes me. I love the original idea and intent around food paint, but it just strikes me how strong a business this is in comparison.
I think it's stronger. I think the demand for food paint version 1 and children, parents wanting to feed their children healthier organic food might be limitless and huge, and we might have scored a winner in some way, shape or form, but we had our chance. We had Walmart, we had Shark Tank, we literally had this product sold, put in front of 5 million people in a single night. And for whatever reasons, it just didn't work. I think because of the size of the frosting market in this country and the fact that nobody has worked out how to make frosting like this, which is to say with natural colors and natural flavors and vitamins and nutrients, and in branding like this, which is immediately eye-catching, not only to the parents, but also to the kids. So the kids are going to be nagging their parents to buy them more of it. This is a much more reliable business model, I think. I think this has potential for far greater growth than food paint version 1.
What have you learned along this journey about marketing that appeals to both kids and parents?
Well, we haven't really had an opportunity to test that theory, whatever that theory is, but until now. But I've had various conversations. For example, the fact that the tubes are now solid colored rather than majority white background, that came about on the advice of another one of my advisors, who's a Forbes journalist, and he was right. Because I'm the sole founder and I'm so close to the product and always have been, I often find myself sort of not frozen with fear, but sort of frozen, needing. It's very hard to have done this on my own without a partner, because if you have a partner, you can bat ideas back and forth. So I've needed, I rely very heavily on my advisors because they're all very, very smart people, and they've always sort of come through with useful information at the right time. This is much more eye-catching. And I think, if you're walking down the aisle in Walmart one day or in Albertsons or Kroger and you see these hanging next to each other, all 4 of them, whether you were looking for frosting or not, your kid's going to spot that. And if your kid doesn't, you're going to spot it. And in contrast to food paint version 1, which might get spotted if it was lucky, and then the parent who had the time to take it off the shelf and try and work out what it was, that was never going to work. Whereas this, because it says frosting on the front in big letters, everybody knows what frosting is. And not only that, as soon as people start buying it and opening the tubes and squirting the product out of the tubes, and it does look like paint, Barbara was right. In that respect, it is a novelty product, but it's a novelty product that has the potential to get huge, I think, because it is unique, but at the same time, it's just frosting. And not only that, it's healthier frosting. It's not healthy frosting, but it's healthier frosting. And the fact that we started work on a naturally colored product 4 months before RFK Jr. said the one sensible thing he's ever said, which was, I don't like artificial food colors, we were ahead of the game.
I was going to ask you, how much of a tailwind you're seeing just around the Maha movement in general, and how you're thinking about playing into the trend, if at all, or do you just think it'll naturally sort of happen?
I don't know why he said that one sensible thing that one time, but he did. And it was just heartening that it was a conversation, probably because it was impossible to ignore the fact that parents, more and more and more and more parents are talking more and more loudly about how unhealthy artificial food dyes are for children in children's food. It is a big problem at the moment, but it's also a really big conversation that's only growing louder. And so for us to suddenly be able to launch this next month on TikTok, in the middle of all of these TikTokers and parents talking about how awful artificial food dyes are, that's really, really helpful, I think. I mean, it's exciting. It's really exciting.
What's to stop somebody else from trying to replicate what you've done? You spoke to how difficult it would be for an incumbent to build a brand like yours, but I'm wondering what you see as the most defensible aspects of your business among potential peers that might pop up.
Well, it would need to be a brand, sort of a startup, I suppose, because as we know, historically, if a Betty Crocker or a Kraft Heinz or a General Mills wanted to get into this space, the easiest way for them to do it is just to do it via acquisition. You can look at an organic frosting brand like Miss Jones, which is great. And she probably will launch a naturally colored range. And I would open source this if I could. I'm not against the idea. It validates the space, right? I think, this is not something I can hide and hope that nobody's going to copy. And I've always, that was a concern at the very, very beginning. I'm like, oh my God, but I don't have the budget to compete. If somebody comes out with a competing version of food paint, I'm going to be screwed. But then I came to realize again, because everything moved at the right pace and I just methodically worked stuff out and learned more about the industry, like it wouldn't be a bad thing if somebody came out with a rival version of food paint, because validates us. It brings more attention to the product and to the space, and people will stop more and work out why it's a good thing and how it works and what it's for. And smiling children, you're going to get a lot of press off the back of that if something works.
What's something you've changed your mind about since this journey started 11 years ago?
The big one, obviously, is that in making peace with launching a product that isn't organic, isn't as healthy as I would have once wanted it to be. I don't want it to be healthier than it is at the moment, because I don't want it to be organic frosting, because the COGS on organic frosting is much, much higher. It's a different business model entirely. I have experience of working with Walmart. And again, that's yet another example of something happening that helped me understand another section of the market. I was selling to small stores at the time, and when they heard that I had just got distribution at Walmart, 3 of them cancelled their partnerships with me. They were like, we don't want to be associated with a brand that sells at Walmart. And I was fine with that. I'm like, I'm not sticking with Walmart because of the money. It's just, why would you object to it? It's, I'm selling a healthier product in Walmart. And that's really the reasoning behind this. The frosting aisle at Walmart at the moment doesn't have any naturally colored, naturally flavored, vitamin infused frosting in it. All I'm doing is putting a product in that space that's healthier. And that can't be a bad thing.
I think we have time for one more question. Where do you see Noshi 3 to 5 years from now?
That's a really tricky question, isn't it? Because if you're sitting across the table from an investor and they ask that question, you're like, well, are they wanting to make their money back fast? So they want me to say I'm going to look to be selling in 18 months? Or do they want me to show my commitment to the cause by saying I'm in this for the long run and I'm not going to sell it for, I'm going to let my grandchildren be running this company? Honestly, in 3 to 5 years, I'm not going to be even thinking about exiting in the next 3 years, but anything between 3 to 5 years from now, given what I know we can do growth-wise and where we can get it to in 3 or 4 years. Yeah, at some point I'm going to want an easier life, because this has nearly killed me. It is. As I jokingly say to people, even if I had $1 million in the bank, this would be the hardest job in the world, within reason. Obviously, there are much more worthwhile and much harder jobs in the world. But in this space, in food and beverage, in consumer goods, it is, and in a country the size of America, trying to break through in a country the size of America, $1 million, that's no guarantee of success. It would still be the hardest job in the world. As it is, I have much less than that. And it is, harder as a result, but I've also learned how to survive. And I'm actually, there's some weird masochistic part of me that really, really has enjoyed it being as hard as it's been. I've been given opportunities in the past. There's suddenly been a chunk of money in the bank, and I didn't have the experience to understand how best to spend that money. Whereas now all of the pieces have fallen into place perfectly, and the product's perfect, and it's the product that Food Paint should always have been. And I'm really, really excited. And so, yeah, I genuinely think that this time in 5 years, I will hopefully be leading a very, very peaceful life, and hopefully close to an ocean, which I've just thrown my phone into.
I am wishing nothing but a very successful exit to you in the 4 to 5 year range. And I'm very excited to see how it all unfolds.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to share with listeners where they can find Noshi, please feel free to do so.
Noshiforkids.com. NOSHIFORKIDS.com.
Thank you again so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's debrief. What stood out to me most in today's conversation was Tomo's willingness to rethink the product after spending more than a decade building it. Food Paint got into Walmart. It went on Shark Tank. Mark Cuban invested. Millions of people saw the product. And yet none of those things changed some of the underlying issues Tomo had been dealing with from the beginning. The product was unfamiliar. It required explanation. The economics were difficult. And eventually, manufacturing became a major problem as well. That's what makes the shift to frosting so interesting. The new version of the product keeps a lot of what made Food Paint distinctive, but puts it into a category people already understand. The margins are dramatically better, the path to market is simpler, and Tomo can launch through TikTok Shop, Amazon, and his own website before taking on the cost and complexity of retail. I really admire his willingness to make that change after putting so much time into the original product. It would have been so easy to keep pushing forward with Food Paint V1, but instead, Tomo was willing to take everything he had learned over the prior decade and use it to build what he believes is a much stronger version of the business. What I kept coming back to after our conversation is that persistence doesn't always mean continuing down the same path. Sometimes you just need to stay with an idea long enough to understand how it needs to change. Again, I learned so much during my conversation with Tomo, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you haven't already, make sure to follow and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.